Every Thursday, our reporter Cierra Bettens hosts the weekly podcast, APTN News InFocus, bringing back our former TV show of the same name in a new format. She takes a deeper look into the headlines and what's making news from coast to coast to coast. This week, Cierra spoke with Jeff Ward, the founder and CEO of Animikii Indigenous Technology, to put Indigenous data sovereignty in focus. Take a listen.
And so when we're thinking about Indigenous data sovereignty principles, how do these principles contrast with how bigger tech companies are viewing, storing, and using data?
Well, big companies see data as the new oil. I think proudly look at data as the new oil, which just further really centers that extractive colonial worldview of data as something to be extracted from, and has value, and how can we turn that into dollars? And when we think about data from an Indigenous perspective, we think about those collective rights, and that's that word C in the CARE principles. That's for collective benefit, and so that's not something to be extracted from data, to be extracted from community.
And Cierra is in studio with us now to share more. Thanks for joining us, Cierra. So the topic of this week's episode is Indigenous data sovereignty. Can you tell us more about what that means?
Yeah, so the concept of Indigenous data sovereignty has been around for a while. In the 90s, we had the principles of OCAP that were established. I guess more recent years, we have the CARE principles of Indigenous data governance. But basically, in simple terms, it's the rights of Indigenous peoples and communities to control, manage, and access their own data. So it's really about, having self-determination over data and how it's stored, how it's managed, who has access to it. And so when we talk about data, we're talking about stories, histories, all the information that really makes us who we are and defines where we come from. So that concept of Indigenous data sovereignty is about it's important to ethically store and manage that data.
I mean, that sounds like something that would be important for anybody, but especially our communities. Why is Indigenous data sovereignty so important to understand in the age of big tech?
Yeah, so something I found really interesting in this conversation that we had for InFocus with Jeff Ward, who's the CEO of Animikii Indigenous Technology, was this idea of data as a resource. So something kind of interesting he said was this idea of data is the new oil. And so when we think about that, we think about these big tech companies wanting to capitalize on data and sort of use that resource to their advantage. But the risk with that is that there's potential to harm Indigenous communities and the data that belongs to them. And so this idea of Indigenous data sovereignty is really affirming this idea that Indigenous peoples should be able to control, govern, and manage their own data in ways that are of collective benefit, rather than a way that a big tech company might see data where it's just to capitalize it or make a profit off of it.
Wow. How is Indigenous data sovereignty being put into practice by Indigenous communities and tech communities? Or tech companies, I should say.
Yeah, so Animikii, which is Jeff Ward, our guest, Indigenous tech company, has a platform called NIWIN. So basically what it is it's a data platform that they developed that allows the Indigenous communities and organizations that they work with to basically exercise Indigenous data sovereignty. So it's, the platform itself gives them the ability to control how their data is managed, who has access to it, where it's stored, what it's used for. So contrasting that with a big tech model where if that data is given to a big tech company, it's kind of unknown how that data might be used, and whether there could be a potential for harm. And the stuff with the rise of AI, when tech companies are really looking to use and profit off that data, I think it's really important to understand and know more about these platforms like NIWIN that are growing, that are allowing the concept of Indigenous data sovereignty to be put in practice.
How can people tune into the InFocus podcast?
Yeah, so you can visit aptnnews.ca/podcast to tune in, or you could just tune in on your favorite player, Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, whatever you usually use to tune into podcasts.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, I'm definitely going to listen to that later today. Thank you so much for joining us, Cierra.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.